I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. In this episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, let's welcome author, medium contributor, and commentator Helena Dearnell. We discuss Helena's Medium article, Shades of Climate Change Denial, and pierce our collective delusion about what is actually happening, the end of infinite growth, and our collective psychosis. Welcome to another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. People with something to say in terms of the most important conversation humanity has ever had to face. And I have the pleasure today of meeting in real time. Is it Helena or Elena?
Helena is fine.
Helena Dearnell. And I bumped into an article that Helena has written in Medium. I'm a big fan of Medium, and Helena, I've just got to say your clarity, your particular point of view and way of expressing yourself is, it's very similar to a number of the sources that we talk about here in this podcast a lot. But you're a person I haven't heard from before. I'm so happy to be hearing from you and your particular way of expressing yourself and how you see the world. And I'm looking forward to diving into that. And if you wouldn't mind, would you start by just giving us a little bit of an introduction and what has brought you through, in your life to this point where you're writing this kind of statement?
Well, I studied engineering, and I've always been interested in science. And then I'm also interested. I'm also a painter, so I'm interested in the arts, and that has given me like a big scope, for a point of view. And I also was since quite young. I was interested in justice in the world, and if you have that and you value critical thinking, once you start seeing what's going on with the planet that we live in, you can't help but start. But you want to learn. So I started to read. I started to think about it more, and that's how I arrived where I am now.
Got it. Part of your bio, which I've forgotten which, there was a website that had some biographical information, and it said that you really appreciated being able to live in Paris and New York for a while, both, because it gave you a much broader perspective. And also, there was some comment about how it also gave you some leverage in disconnecting from the status quo. I'm sorry, I'm not saying that exactly as it was written.
No, that's absolutely correct. Yes, I do think that actually, because I lived in different places, and because I actually come from Colombia, so already South America, so already I already know what it is to feel a little bit like an outsider, and I do think that actually as an outsider, or feeling like an outsider, you can look and question things in the culture in an easier way than when you're completely in the culture, trying to fit in all the time. And since I'm like an artist, so I also have some sort of outside point of view, which allows me to, well, to have more critical thinking.
Yeah. Well, do you mind if we dive in just a little bit to your Shades of Climate Change Denial article?
Yeah.
So I really just love it. You have a lovely way of starting us out, the folks who are readers with you. You know, you have ways of saying in two or three sentences, you know, really what our situation is, and so it's pretty great. And you really are leaning heavily on just what is this, what is denial, and what is climate change denial, and how does it fit in the human condition? Like, why do we have this going on? And I think that's a really valuable line of questioning. And I don't know if you're aware of the book called Denial from Ajit Varkai and Danny Brower.
Yeah, I have heard about it. Yeah.
Yeah. The one phrase I would say coming out of that book, uh, it's probably not fair for me to put it into one phrase, but um, is that uh, their Varkai and Brower seem to have landed in somewhere in the vicinity of saying denial, particularly denial of death, is actually not a bad thing for humanity. It could be interpreted as our superpower. So again, those are my words, not theirs, and you know, one sentence instead of 300 pages.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to say about that, or what you've seen now that you've spent some time looking at denial? Because I'm interested in how you see it and how it serves us or how it hurts us.
Well, I would say that, you know, that since we are the most intelligent animal, no, in the planet, and but we have a certain consciousness. And like I said in the article, we have what is called the theory of mind, which means that we are we can attribute our own, you know, we can attribute emotions and feelings and to other to ourselves and to other people. We are very aware of everything that goes on, and if you think about it, being so aware of our own demise is quite difficult actually. So there had to be something in the makeup of our brain that allowed us to talk ourselves out of that fear or out of that, you know, reality, which actually is going to happen to everybody, but we somehow manage not to think about it all the time. And that is an advantage, but at the same time, it ends up being a disadvantage, no? But it's an advantage because we can live our lives, whatever you know, as normal. But that same denial can turn, you know, capacity for denial, because it's just a capacity that we have and we can use it for whatever it is. It's the same one that is allowing us not to notice that we have ruined our own environment for our own survival of all of us. So we have a denial in order to cope with death, but we don't. But it seems to be working against us when it comes to thinking about extinction of life or things on our planet and our own extinction.
Right, right. So if I step just a couple of steps further into your article, which of course I'll put the link in the show notes for this episode of the podcast down below, but um, when I step further into your article, one piece that I love the way you talk about it, because I think that the vast majority of people who listen to this type of podcast, who are involved in this conversation of the collapse of Earth and human systems, climate change, and so on, we all know what it's like to try and speak with someone who is a denier. And we all know the nightmare that it is to talk with someone who's really violently or aggressively a denier. Like it's more than just an uncomfortable experience. It's something that could easily turn us away from an entire segment of the population. Just write them off. So, and you cover that ground. I'm actually interested in going to, there's one particular example that you use for one of the shades of denial. And that's when you start to talk about the kind of denial that Barack Obama embodies. Can you say more about that?
Yes, because actually, I think that, well, precisely is shades of denial. So everybody thinks of, let's say, somebody like Trump or, you know, as the denier, and that's where we stay, just in black and white. So, and people consider, let's say, Obama or the Democrats in general as the good, the ones in the good side of climate change. But I find that a lot of people are like Obama in a way. But I mean, I don't think. I just think it's because our denial is based on what is convenient for us. So he comes, when he talks, he accepts climate change. He's not of those people that you were saying it's tough to talk to because they just say no, no. He knows what to say, but then when he goes into action, the denial, the forces around him of let's say, the donors from Wall Street, the donors from fossil fuels, his own party actually is start, saying things. So he goes into denial by saying, I'm still fine. I still accept climate change, except now I'm going into the, pushing fracking and oil exploration to turn the U.S. into the biggest oil producer, and I boast about it even, without thinking that actually what he's doing was actually terrible for the environment, for the whole global emissions of greenhouse gases. So that's a denial, but we create some sort of rationalization of, so that it's convenient for him. It's convenient to see himself as a educated climate change acceptor, but it's also convenient to deny that the things that he did don't exactly go with that.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you making those distinctions, and I'm a firm believer that Barack Obama was the best Republican president that the USA has had, maybe ever. And
Yes, probably.
He was never a Democrat as far as I'm concerned, and he certainly is a long, long way from being a progressive. And I agree, he did brag about his track record of getting fracking going in the USA, offshore oil drilling, and perhaps most gruesome of all is, under his watch, the brutality of the reaction against the Standing Rock, the water protectors.
Yeah, exactly. That was brutal.
So I really appreciate how you describe that, and I think we're in an area of the conversation here that's very personal to me, and I think again for many of the people who will be watching, is the kind of denial that actually scares me far more than the really aggressive deniers. Is the deniers who are friends and family and associates and the folks that I see as I go to the supermarket, you know, folks just in my world,
Yeah.
that they might give me a few seconds of polite conversation and nodding if if I bring up something about what really is on my heart, what's really important to me, what, you know, they ask how you doing, so every once in a while I tell the truth.
Well, yes.
And that lasts for about 15, 20 seconds of their tolerance level. And I can see a subtle shift that I'm very used to now. There's a little bit less of a smile, there's a little bit of a glaze over their eyes, and there's less of them present in the conversation. And that's kind of, just a polite way of sort of indicating the conversation's over. And if enough of those incidents happen, I notice that I don't see those people much anymore. If we connect, it's because I reach out to connect with them. Like I'm not invited over for dinner anymore, that kind of a thing. Can you say anything about that level of denial? Is that a part of your shades of denial?
Yes, that is certainly part. But I think the problem is precisely that basically our whole culture is in denial. And this is why it's very difficult to find people that have managed to pull out of that. Because if you are in the world, let's say, what you hear on TV, what you hear on the radio, the newspapers, the general preoccupations of people don't include really climate change or climate breakdown. They, on the contrary, I mean, if you watch, it's enough to watch a little bit of TV and you see even some news like the PBS NewsHour, for example, and they have like the Dow Jones went up this amount today, and I'm always thinking about when you have how is the CO2 and the methane and the nitrous oxide, and instead of that, because actually it's more relevant for us. Who cares whether the Dow Jones went up or not, no? And that shows the priorities of our culture that I think they are a little bit extreme at the moment towards precisely our consumerism, an idea of growth, that we have to buy more cars, we have to do this. And when you think like you and I, it's almost, you think like, but it's, the priorities are completely wrong. So it's very hard to kind of, for most people, I find, in the media, they repeat all sorts of other priorities all the time. While climate change and environmental degradation is not mentioned very often, even though it's mentioned more lately, but not as often as the other things. So they just see you as you're, it's not in their priorities. I think you would have, I do think we have to see that we're in a society, and somehow the media is failing.
Yeah. I'd like to just read the last paragraph from, let me see if I can get back to, there we go. I would like to read just the last paragraph of your Shades of Climate Change Denial essay. According to neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, though humans have a strong tendency towards denial, it is possible to choose to bypass it. If we deliberately decide to do it, the internal momentum required to do this can only arise with enough understanding of the reality of the situation. This difficult personal effort would have to be repeated globally so that change would become inevitable, and we would have an emergent wave of strong awareness of the need to strip ourselves of all denial regarding the true state of the planet that sustains us. Until we do it, we will only be putting small bandages on a profusely bleeding wound. So those are your own words. I'm wondering if you're sparked to say anything more about those words.
Well, I think that precisely, I mean, the kind of change that we need is obviously a bit, would require incredible amount of effort, and that begins with the minds of people, that they somehow have to see the need for it, because if not, how are you going to turn people who just, use their car for everything, or think they can that life as usual, business as usual, like you say,
Right.
can continue forever, no? And it's, it's very difficult to get that effort if you are not in a you have to be in a way spooked by it. You have to understand what happens. You have to understand how it affects not just your locality, but it affects the whole world, and how that affects all the ecosystems, and how we actually rely on those ecosystems. And until we don't get to a certain point of knowledge that will make us globally understand the threat, the real threat that we have, I don't think there can be anything done. We just have to adapt to whatever happens. That's all. Because and then again, I say the media, and the whole culture that is very powerful, a culture of like we can fix everything with technology. The problems are there to be fixed. But when you have changed all of the systems of the earth, the problem has to be seen a different way. Maybe you have to adapt. Maybe we have to reduce our consumption drastically. Maybe we have to conserve all the energy possible. It would be a completely different world.
Yep. Yep. You're reminding me of the only other thing I read from you, and that was that was the media and climate change article that was also in Medium. I'm wondering, beyond what you were just saying, is there more that you've seen, the role that media plays in this global scale predicament that we're in? Is there more that you would be able to say about what you see the role of media playing?
Well, I mean, first, in order for the media to be able to do something, it would have to be, it cannot be corporate owned. And even in places where it's not, like probably like in France or whatever, it tends to be more from the government. It's always like a vicious circle. The media would say what the culture allows for it to say. So, like you were saying, if you go and talk to somebody and you talk about something that they don't like, they start to send you the message. And if you have a corporate media where your sponsors start to give you the message of that, therefore the media tends to do more or less what Obama did, which is to kind of have a few articles about, yeah, this is happening, mostly about, extreme things in like fires or whatever, without ever explaining much. So for that, in a way, we would, then again, it becomes like some sort of feedback loop in which the people have to ask for a media that would respond to what is happening now, but at the same time, they won't do it until they feel there is a need for it. So that is the, and I'm thinking the only way is that, well, when the feedback mechanisms in the earth start making us suffer more people are going to be aware. But I think that for now, people, it's very difficult to change the media.
Yeah. I agree. So I have just a slightly different direction and question for you. I don't know if you've heard of another journalist and author, David Wallace Wells.
Yes.
Yeah. So his article in 2017, "The Uninhabitable Earth," which just is released as a full book.
As a book, yeah.
He's been hitting the speaker circuit. He's talking everywhere, and I'm noticing I have deep admiration, particularly for his annotated version of his original article. I have not read the book yet, but the annotated version, if I would say that there's no better introduction to what is the current state of affairs of the planet and the environment and habitat, and particularly from the climate change frame, as that original article. But going to where you were just talking about with regard to context in media, and he's about as good as it gets right now in terms of media representation of what's really going on. And I'm a little disturbed by some of the context that he's included in his recent talking about his book, promoting his book. One thing is exactly what you were just talking about with promoting that there are these techno fixes. We're clever and we're going to come up with answers. And once we come up with answers, we don't have to change anything. We can continue to be in a growth-based economy. And I think what I'm hearing from you in both now in our conversation and also in your writing, that basically we have to confront the impossibility, the lie that has always been in the phrase infinite growth on a finite planet. It just has to stop somewhere. And it seems to me like what you and I are talking about right now is we have hit the end of that lie. Is that true for you too?
Absolutely, yes. And I think that precisely the thing is actually, if you wanna have sell your book and have it in, because it's enough that you go to bookstores and you look for the books about climate change or something like that, you rarely find one. And yesterday I went to a bookstore and I found that his book was right there, no? But in order to do that, you have to, you have to say what you were saying. You have to give a lot of hope, and not only hope of how we can fix this, but also that we can stay in business as usual, because that's what people want to hear in a way.
Right.
So this is like when you take a lot of people that are aware of climate change, no? And then they like, I don't know, like the people who well, I value what they do a lot, that they are against fracking, they're against, of course I'm against that. But when they marching with signs saying keep it in the ground, no? And I don't know if they understand that and it's as though keep it in the ground means that we can continue as usual, no? Okay, we can keep it. We should keep it in the ground, of course, the fossil fuel. But if we would do that, do they know the reality of that? I mean, the reality of that is that we're still using 80% of fossil fuels for our global energy consumption. We use renewables mostly for electricity, which is only 18% of that, of that total energy that we consume. And how are we going to suddenly live with only 20% of the energy we now consume, and that we consume all the time more and more and more? Not thinking even about all the environmental degradation that all that causes, no? So I find that, then, I mean, as I said in my article, it's like we're humans, and therefore we all have some element of denial. Denial is something that's very difficult. You try to escape it, and then it comes through the back door. But certainly that's something that a lot of people accept more than the fact that no way, we have to change completely. We would have to, So I think that's in a way it doesn't help. It helps because he can get out information about awareness about what's going on, just like Naomi Klein can do the same thing, no? But then when it comes to what can we do, she's still assuming that we can just switch to renewables like that for our whole energy consumption, and everything will be fine,
Right.
changing, to a more equal society or something like that. But I think we're going to have to change much more than that.
Got it. By the way, I'm in complete agreement with where you just went in that. I have a couple of words or definitions that I'd like to run by you and just see where they are for you. One of them is, I think there's another type of denial that I'm not sure if it's in your article, in your writing or not. And that is that I think we have been manipulated by the people who control the media and control the narrative and the conversation, by that this is actually a climate change conversation. I think climate change is but one small part of the larger picture. The larger picture is what's going on, and the only words I've been able to come up with that hold the actual scale of what we're talking about is collapse of Earth and human systems. That's
good, yes.
Yeah, what we're encountering is it really goes back to that phrase that I mentioned earlier, the impossibility of infinite growth on a finite planet. And the more we try and push that infinity in the face of the brick wall, the more suffering that we're going to be that we are causing. So it sounds like we're pretty much on the same page with that one. Does that sound right?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So let me just go to one facet of that with the David Wallace Wells situation again, and that was, in one of his talks, he mentions, he does say that animal agriculture, particularly beef production, is a huge impact in climate, in greenhouse gas emissions and so on. Absolutely, I get that. I'm glad he brought it up. But the next phrase out of his mouth is, the only thing that makes animal agriculture, particularly beef production, a problem for climate change is their flatulence, is their burps. And it's been found that feeding cows seaweed, in addition to their feed, stops that belching problem. And so he's saying, he's parading that as that's the answer. All we have to do is feed these cows seaweed, and off we go in a thriving, growing economy. No stop necessary.
We can eat all the beef that we want.
Right. So does that spark you to say anything?
Well, yes, because I think precisely what you were saying. We are too, well, we are too many. So whatever we do is impacting the planet just by the sheer number of people that need increasing, like to eat beef, to eat whatever. But when you and you're right that when you think only about the, let's say, the greenhouse gases, which is already bad, but then you have to consider the whole environmental degradation, the amount of water that is needed, the, like the allocation of land, and especially when you see that the people that propose all these solutions, some of them, are proposing like biofuels or using like land in order to sequester like CO2 or things like that. You think we have to think about how are we going to feed ourselves without causing an incredible amount of environmental degradation, and at the same time, like feed ourselves. And actually, when he's talking about that, but when we think about it, agriculture just for plants is equally awful, because you see all the, and actually, like you have to feed the cows with corn or alfalfa or whatever it is, and already all that is putting tons of pesticides, tons of Roundup,
Yeah.
like fertilizers that have ruined, like fertilizers with nitrogen have ruined the nitrogen cycle on Earth. And it all creates, I mean, what we think is, I have another article in Medium that is called Technological Progress and Environmental Degradation, where I talk about that, precisely how we think we're improving something, and actually we end up with so many side effects in the environmental degradation thing that, and we like you were saying, he's in denial because he thinks a simple fix, you just give, okay, great news, we're giving them seaweed and they're fine, therefore we don't have to worry. But it's not true. We have to certainly see the whole problem together.
Yep. I am again with you there. I've If I may, I'd just like to run a couple of last questions by you. Um, I saw again in your biographical information on another site that you did some study in civil engineering.
Yeah.
So you have a broad and informed view that certainly a person like myself doesn't have. You have some valuable context there, I think. And I'm curious. You mentioned just a couple of minutes ago something that is truly the the third rail, the deadliest of deadly topics to bring up in a conversation, and that is population. I'm curious if you have uh, any any notion whatsoever of what an optimal or a sustainable human population number might be on the planet.
That's that's a tough question because it's true. I mean, you know, it will probably be like I I know I've seen different people give different numbers, and I would say probably a billion would be. You know, if you think right now, for example, that let's say we would all have no more fossil fuels and we would have to heat ourselves and cook with wood. With the amount of number that we are, if we all went to use wood, it would end up unmanageable, no? I mean, so I would say about 1 billion, but in truth, I haven't really. I mean, I have heard different people, but I don't know.
Yeah,
No.
I that's completely fair, and I appreciate you just letting us know your thoughts about it, because that's all any of us can do, no matter how expert we are. Obviously, there's no one that really knows
No,
what
no.
what is best, and when actually things will be unavoidably, undeniably, unquestionably in collapse. And that's my next question. I'm, we're talking about such a broad range here. We're obviously not talking about just climate change or just fossil fuel emissions, CO2 emissions. We're talking about virtually any aspect of Earth and human systems that we can name. There isn't a one of them that isn't suffering at this moment, isn't stressed at this moment to very near a breaking point. I'm curious if you have any particular Earth or human systems that particularly get your attention. Let me give you an example. I've always been an ocean person. I go to the ocean to recharge my heart, recharge my inner batteries. It's where my spiritual home is. And so I pay special attention to the news and the updates whatever I can find about the ocean, and just to be able to get a sense of that which I believe is really the center of life on Earth, given is we are a blue planet. So enough about what I'm seeing. That's what gets my attention. That's kind of my number one item I keep my attention on. And in terms of human systems, I'm predicting that human systems will be collapsing, particularly the economic system globally will be collapsing. I would be amazed if you and I could talk in 2 years. I would be amazed if we didn't have a collapse larger than anything we've ever seen. So there's my whole question for you is human systems, Earth systems that have your attention, and approximate estimate of when do you think those will collapse?
Well, from Earth system, I think. Well, I think I have to. I have the ocean like you, because like you, I also see it as the source of all good. But like it's true that since we, in a way, life came from the ocean, and we tend not to notice that if the ocean ecosystem goes, we go too, no? And I was reading that the global, what is it called, the global oceanic survey from Scotland gives about 25 years for, or less, obviously, because it's a whole, the whole combination of the ocean is getting warmer, it's losing oxygen, the agriculture is creating dead zones, the plastics, all that stuff, no? And I mean, and I do think that actually that goes, but at the same time, there's something else like the bees, no? If we lose the bees, which we're on our way, certainly we're doing, because we're not cutting our use of neonicotinoids. I do think that we're going to be in big trouble.
We basically lost 70 to 80% of the insect population on the planet.
So if you combine already those two, like the sea and the collapse of the sea and the collapse of the bees, or plus you have like the greenhouse gas problems in the earth at large, you have real problems. But I do think that we also have, like, yeah, I do agree with you that something is, yeah, that the economic system is not going to be able to hold, because it's based on such incredible amount of fossil fuels that actually are dwindling. So they're going to find, that, if every time they always talk about we're getting more and more, but the truth is that they're getting more and more, but it's more expensive and difficult to get, and what you get is not really that good. And at some point, either one is going to get us. It's either from the energy point of view, it's going to ruin our economy, or droughts and just like we're not going to be able to grow food the same way. All that is enough to stop completely what we seem to see as the most important thing, the economic life that we have now.
Yeah. Thank you. I really just appreciate the particular focus and the areas of study and personal experience that you bring to your way of writing and expressing about our global situation. And I I just really appreciate when I get to meet someone who's ridiculously articulate and able to really put these pieces, these very complicated pieces, into some kind of a form that helps me understand a little bit more, and hopefully people also for whom this conversation is new. And I think you do that very, very well. I really appreciate your coming on. I mean, we've just met, and so this is
yes, new. But I'm very glad to have met you, because
yeah. So you now, I don't know if you've had a chance to check out my website, thelivingresilience.net.
Yes, I have. Yes, I've looked at a few things. Yes.
Yeah, and you know that we've, I'm just on the edge of putting up a series of learning videos, really designed to do what your articles do also, which is to really open people to new possibilities, new ways of seeing what's going on. and hopefully to be able to set aside a little bit of whatever shade of denial I might have. Might be just a little bit easier to set it aside if I'm more aware of it. So I appreciate that way in which we're aligned. I'm wondering, as one last thing, Helena, if I could ask, if you had the opportunity to give a message to people who are new to this conversation, new to this way of seeing what's going on in the world, what might you say?
Tough one. Well, I would say that I think that we it's essential that we learn about the planet that we live in, because after all, this is our home, and that that it's worth making that effort, and that if a lot of times that effort is hindered a little bit by fear, and I would say what I put in the quote that I put in the article is the James Baldwin quote, mm-hmm. that we can change. How is it? We can. Wait a second. We can only.
I'm looking for it too.
Wait a second. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced.
Yeah.
So I would say that what we need is knowledge. I mean, daring to have more more knowledge, and then keep that James Baldwin quote in mind.
Yeah. Wonderful. I again agree completely, and am just enchanted by being able to hear your perspectives and your way of putting things together. And I hope this is not our last chance to have this.
I hope so, because I've enjoyed it, and I have enjoyed meeting you.
Yeah. So let me just take a moment here to unpin our conversation. That's it for this round of the Poetry of Predicament podcast with our guest, Helena Dearnell. And I think I'm going to make a special place somewhere on the website for the quote that you just quoted us. It's just so ridiculously perfect at this time in human history. Helena, I hope you will accept future invitations. I'm going to definitely send them out to you. And I look forward to whatever your articles are in Medium and elsewhere. And thank you so much for talking with us.
Well, yeah, you're welcome.
All right.
It was a pleasure to meet you, and it was I would be happy to talk to you again. Yes.
Great. Well, you take good care of yourself.
Okay, you too. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.